There's a place in Europe where you pay 0% capital gains tax, 0% inheritance tax, and if you run the right kind of business, 0% corporate tax. It's not some offshore island thousands of miles away. It's sitting right in the middle of the Irish Sea, visible from England on a clear day. The Isle of Man has a population smaller than a mid-sized American suburb. Yet it hosts some of the world's largest gambling companies, manages billions in international wealth, and runs its own government that's older than most countries. It's not part of the United Kingdom. It's not a country. It's not even a territory. So, what on earth is it? And how did a tiny island pull off one of the most advantageous geopolitical positions in Europe? Let's start with the basics, because the Isle of Man's location is everything. The island sits almost perfectly centered in the Irish Sea, equidistant from England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. From its closest point, you're looking at about 19 miles to England's Cumbrian coast. Ireland sits roughly 32 miles to the west. Scotland's about 27 miles north, and Wales around 30 miles south. This positioning isn't just convenient, it's strategic. For centuries, whoever controlled the Isle of Man controlled access to some of the most important waterways in the British Isles. The island itself covers about 221 square miles. To put that in perspective, it's slightly smaller than New York City's 5 boroughs combined, and about twice the size of Liechtenstein. If the Isle of Man were a country, it would rank as the 179th largest in the world, sitting between Dominica and Singapore in terms of land area. But unlike Singapore, which packs nearly 6 million people into a similar space, the Isle of Man has just 85,000 residents. That's roughly the population of Scranton, Pennsylvania, or South Bend, Indiana. Now, here's where the geography gets interesting. The island isn't flat. Its highest point, Snaefell, rises to 2,036 feet above sea level. That might not sound impressive compared to actual mountains, but for a small island in the Irish Sea, it creates dramatic terrain. The name Snaefell comes from Old Norse, meaning snow mountain, a reminder of the island's Viking past. On a clear day from Snaefell's summit, you can supposedly see 6 kingdoms: England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Man itself, and the Kingdom of Heaven. Whether you believe that last one is up to you, but the visibility claim is real. This vantage point would have been militarily valuable for centuries. The coastline stretches for about 100 miles and varies wildly. The northern coast features rugged cliffs dropping straight into the sea. The eastern side, where the capital Douglas sits, has more accessible beaches and natural harbors. The western coast sees some of the roughest waters, taking the full force of Atlantic storms that sweep across Ireland. The southern tip is lower and more sheltered. This variety in coastline meant different parts of the island served different purposes historically. Douglas became the administrative center because of its harbor. Peel on the west coast became the fishing hub. Ramsey in the north served as a secondary port. The terrain itself is often compared to northern England or the Scottish borders. You've got rolling green hills, valleys carved by small rivers, and patches of moorland on higher ground. The island gets significant rainfall, about 45 inches per year on average, which keeps everything lush and green. The climate is temperate maritime, moderated by the Gulf Stream, which means mild winters and cool summers. The highest temperature ever recorded was about 83 degrees Fahrenheit, back in 1983. The coldest it's gotten in recorded history is around -3 degrees Fahrenheit. Compare that to mainland Britain, which hit 104 degrees in 2022, and you can see how the surrounding ocean keeps temperatures moderate. So we've established where it is and what it looks like. Now let's address the elephant in the room. What actually is the Isle of Man? The official designation is a self-governing British Crown Dependency. That sounds like bureaucratic nonsense, so let's break it down piece by piece, because this status is absolutely crucial to understanding how the island operates. First, self-governing. The Isle of Man has its own parliament called Tynwald, which is actually the oldest continuous parliament in the world, dating back over 1,000 years, to around 979 when Norse kings ruled the island. Tynwald makes its own laws on almost everything that happens on the island. Taxes, healthcare, education, policing, courts, roads, you name it. The UK Parliament in Westminster has zero authority to pass laws for the Isle of Man. None. If the British government wants to change something on the island, they can't just do it. They would need the Isle of Man's permission. Second, British Crown Dependency. This is where it gets tricky. The Isle of Man is not part of the United Kingdom. It's not a territory of the UK. It's not a colony. Instead, it has a relationship with the British Crown, meaning the monarchy, not the British government. At the time of making this, that's King Charles III. But here's the thing, the king's role is almost entirely ceremonial. He's called the Lord of Man, but he doesn't actually govern. He can't veto laws, he can't impose taxes. His representative on the island, the lieutenant governor, mostly shows up for ceremonies and official events. The practical arrangement works like this. The Isle of Man runs itself, but the UK handles two specific things: defense and international relations. The island doesn't have its own military. If someone invaded, the British armed forces would defend it. The island also can't negotiate its own treaties or join international organizations independently. It can't join the United Nations, NATO, or the European Union on its own. For those purposes, the UK represents man's interests. But, and this is important, the UK can't force the island to do anything domestically. It's a voluntary arrangement that benefits both sides. There are two other Crown dependencies with similar setups: Jersey and Guernsey, both in the Channel Islands off the French coast. Together, these three dependencies occupy a unique space in international law. They're not sovereign countries, but they're not governed by the UK either. They're self-governing territories under the sovereignty of the British Crown. It's a relationship that dates back centuries and has somehow survived into the modern era. Now you might be wondering, why doesn't the Isle of Man just become independent? Why maintain this connection to the UK at all? The answer is entirely practical. Defense is expensive. Maintaining a military capable of protecting your territory costs billions. For a population of 85,000, that's not realistic. International relations are also complex and resource-intensive. Having the UK handle foreign affairs means the island gets British diplomatic protection, access to British intelligence services, and the implicit security guarantee of being under the UK's defensive umbrella. That's incredibly valuable. At the same time, the island gets to set its own tax policy, which, as we'll get into, is the foundation of its entire modern economy. If the Isle of Man were part of the UK, it would have to follow UK tax law. If it became fully independent, it would lose the security and diplomatic benefits. The current arrangement is the best of both worlds: run your own show, but keep the protection of a major power. This status also affects how the island relates to the European Union. And this is where things got really interesting during the whole Brexit situation. The Isle of Man was never part of the European Union, even when the UK was a member. However, it had a special relationship through Protocol 3 of the UK's Treaty of Accession. This allowed Manx goods to move freely within the EU customs union, and allowed EU citizens to live and work on the island. When the UK left the EU, the Isle of Man had to negotiate its own arrangements. Because it's not part of the UK, Brexit didn't automatically apply. But because its international relations go through the UK, it was affected. The island ended up maintaining some access to UK markets, while losing some EU privileges. But here's what didn't change: its tax system. And that brings us to why the Isle of Man's geographic position, combined with its political status, makes it one of the most interesting places in Europe economically. The Isle of Man is what's called a tax haven, though people on the island prefer terms like low-tax jurisdiction or international finance center. Whatever you call it, the numbers are striking. The island has 0% capital gains tax, 0% inheritance tax, 0% stamp duty. The corporate tax rate is 0% for most businesses, and even for those that do pay, it caps out at 10%. The income tax rate has a maximum of 20%, which is lower than the UK's top rate of 45%. How does this work? How can a government function with such low taxes? The answer is that not everyone pays low taxes. Individuals pay income tax, and that funds basic government services. But the island's economy is structured to attract specific types of businesses that generate revenue without needing high tax rates. Online gambling is a perfect example. The Isle of Man is home to some of the world's largest online poker sites and betting companies. These companies need to be licensed somewhere, and the Isle of Man offers a well-regulated environment with low taxes. The companies pay licensing fees. They employ local people who pay income tax, and they bring money into the island's economy. Shipping is another big sector. Ship registration in the Isle of Man is attractive because of favorable tax treatment and a good regulatory reputation. The island has one of the world's largest shipping registries. Then, there's banking and wealth management. High net worth individuals and companies set up structures in the Isle of Man to manage assets, take advantage of no capital gains tax, and benefit from privacy protections. Now, this is where geography comes back into play. The Isle of Man isn't successful as a tax haven just because of low taxes. Lots of places have low taxes. The island succeeds because of where it is. It sits in the same time zone as London, one of the world's financial capitals. It's a short flight or ferry ride from major UK cities. English is the primary language. The legal system is based on English common law, which international businesses understand. It's politically stable with a functioning democracy and rule of law, and crucially, it has that connection to the UK, which gives it credibility and security that some Caribbean or Pacific tax havens don't have. The economic impact is visible in the numbers. The Isle of Man's GDP is approximately $8 billion US. For a population of 85,000, that gives a GDP per capita of around $94,000, which would rank it among the wealthiest places on Earth. But here's the catch: that number is somewhat misleading. A lot of the economic activity generated by international companies doesn't actually benefit local residents directly. A corporation might book billions in revenue through a Manx subsidiary, inflating the GDP. But that money doesn't necessarily circulate in the local economy or raise living standards for average islanders. That said, the finance sector does employ a significant portion of the workforce and generates tax revenue for the government. About 40% of the island's economy comes from financial and business services. Another big chunk comes from online gambling and gaming, which employs thousands of people. Tourism brings in some revenue, though less than you might think, for an island with scenic beauty and unique attractions. Speaking of attractions, we have to talk about the TT races, because nothing says geographic advantage quite like turning your entire island into a racetrack. The Isle of Man TT, which stands for Tourist Trophy, is one of the oldest and most dangerous motorcycle races in the world. It's been running since 1907, and it involves motorcyclists racing at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour on public roads. Not a closed track. Actual roads that normal people drive on the other 364 days of the year. The course is about 37 miles long and winds through towns, over mountains, and along coastal roads. Riders navigate over 200 corners per lap. The current lap record is held at an average speed of over 135 miles per hour, which is absolutely insane when you consider the course includes stone walls, houses, and trees inches from the track. Since the race began, over 270 riders have died competing. That's not a typo. Over 270 deaths in the race's history. Why does the Isle of Man allow this? Why doesn't the UK or some international body shut it down? This is where the island's self-governing status matters. The Isle of Man makes its own laws. The UK can't tell them to stop. The race is part of the island's identity and a major tourism draw. Every year in late May and early June, the island's population more than doubles as fans, and riders descend for 2 weeks of racing. Hotels fill up. Restaurants do massive business. It's a significant economic event. But it's also a window into the island's culture and mentality. The Isle of Man has a population of 85,000. Yet it hosts an event that would never be allowed in most developed countries because of safety concerns. The island's attitude seems to be that adults can make their own decisions about risk. This independent streak runs through a lot of what makes Man unique. Take the language, for example. The Isle of Man has 2 official languages, English and Manx. Manx is a Celtic language closely related to Irish and Scottish Gaelic. For most of the 20th century, Manx was essentially dead as a native language. The last native speaker died in 1974. But unlike most dead languages, Manx has seen a revival. There are now schools teaching children in Manx, and estimates suggest 1,000 to 2,000 people can speak it to some degree. It's still classified as critically endangered, but the fact that it's being actively revived on an island of 85,000 people shows a commitment to cultural preservation. What does Manx sound like? To an English speaker, it's got this interesting quality where it almost sounds familiar but isn't. You can hear the Celtic influences similar to Irish, with some sounds that feel Nordic, which makes sense given the island's Viking history. The island was ruled by Norse kings for centuries, and that left a permanent mark on the culture and place names. The island's flag is another cultural quirk worth mentioning. It features 3 armored legs joined at the thigh, arranged in a rotating pattern. It's called the Triskelion, or the 3 legs of man. Nobody knows exactly why this symbol was chosen, but theories suggest it represents stability, balance, or the idea that no matter how you throw the island, it lands on its feet. Sicily has a similar flag, though theirs includes a head in the center, which arguably makes it even stranger. Now let's talk about what it's actually like to live on the Isle of Man, because the geographic isolation creates some unique realities. The island has no airport with international flights beyond the British Isles. You can fly to London, Manchester, Liverpool, Dublin, and a handful of other nearby cities, but that's it. If you want to go anywhere else, you're connecting through the UK or Ireland. There's also a ferry service that runs to England and Ireland, carrying both passengers and vehicles. This isolation means everything costs more. Goods have to be shipped or flown in, which adds to prices. Groceries cost more than on the mainland. Fuel costs more. If you need something specialized, you might have to order it from the UK and wait for shipping. On the flip side, crime is remarkably low. The island consistently ranks as one of the safest places in the British Isles. Violent crime is rare. Most offenses are things like traffic violations or minor property crimes. You'd be hard-pressed to find a safer place to raise a family. The population is about 85,000, with around 27,000 living in the capital, Douglas. That's nearly a third of the entire population in one town. Douglas sits on the eastern coast and serves as the island's economic and administrative hub. It's where most of the financial services companies have their offices, where the government buildings are, and where the ferry terminal is located. The rest of the population is spread across smaller towns like Ramsey in the north, Peel on the west coast, and Castletown in the south. The island's small size means you can drive from one end to the other in under an hour, assuming you're not stuck behind a tractor or a flock of sheep. And yes, there are more sheep on the island than people, which is true of a lot of places in the British Isles. The sheep are actually part of the island's heritage. A specific breed called the Manx Loagtan, which has 4 horns instead of 2, is native to the island and considered critically rare. Healthcare on the island is provided by a public system similar to the UK's National Health Service, though it's independently run. Education follows a similar model to the UK, with primary and secondary schools. And students often go to the UK for university. There's no university on the island itself, which makes sense given the population size. One interesting aspect of life on Man is the lack of speed limits on certain rural roads. Yes, you read that right. Some roads have no speed limit at all. This isn't because the island is lawless. It's a holdover from older laws and the island's independent approach to regulation. In practice, most people drive reasonably because the roads are narrow, winding, and shared with tractors and cyclists. But during the TT races, those same roads become a high-speed death track. The island's relationship with its neighbors is also worth examining. With England just 19 miles away, there's constant movement of people and goods. Many people live on the island but work in the UK, commuting by plane. Others live in the UK but have businesses registered on Man. The Common Travel Area, which includes the UK, Ireland, and the Crown Dependencies, allows free movement without passport checks, though you still need ID to prove residency status. This free movement creates an interesting dynamic. Someone could live in the Isle of Man, pay lower taxes, and still have full access to the UK and Ireland. But there are rules. To be considered a tax resident of the Isle of Man, you need to actually live there for a certain number of days per year. You can't just set up a mailbox and claim residency. The island has gotten stricter about this over the years, as international pressure has increased to crack down on tax avoidance schemes. The Isle of Man's status as a tax haven has attracted criticism from some quarters. Critics argue that low-tax jurisdictions enable tax avoidance by wealthy individuals and corporations, depriving other countries of revenue. Defenders of the Isle of Man point out that everything the island does is legal, that it complies with international financial transparency standards, and that it has a legitimate right to set its own tax policy as a self-governing territory. The island has worked hard to distance itself from the shadier side of offshore finance. It's not a secrecy jurisdiction where anonymous shell companies can hide money with no questions asked. The Isle of Man has signed onto international agreements for sharing tax information. It maintains a register of beneficial ownership for companies. It has anti-money laundering regulations and financial oversight bodies. The goal is to be seen as a respectable, low-tax jurisdiction, not a place for criminals to hide money. This matters because the island's economy depends on its reputation. If major economies decided to blacklist the Isle of Man or impose sanctions, the financial services industry would collapse. The island has to walk a fine line, offering competitive tax rates while proving it's not facilitating illegal activity. So far, it's managed to maintain that balance, but it requires constant attention and adaptation to changing international standards. Geographically, the island's position in the Irish Sea has always been its greatest asset, and occasionally its greatest vulnerability. In the medieval period, the Isle of Man changed hands repeatedly between Norse, Scottish, and English rulers. Whoever controlled the island controlled a strategic point in the Irish Sea, which was crucial for trade and military movement. The English eventually established dominance in the 13th century, but the island retained significant autonomy even then. During World War II, the Isle of Man played an interesting role. Because of its isolation and self-governance, it was used as an internment camp for enemy aliens and prisoners of war. Thousands of people, mostly German and Italian nationals living in Britain, were sent to internment camps on the island. Some were Nazi sympathizers, but many were Jewish refugees who had fled Nazi Germany and were now being imprisoned by the British as potential security threats. It's one of the stranger chapters in the island's history. The war also highlighted the island's vulnerability. German bombers occasionally hit the island, though it was never a major target. The bigger issue was supply. The island imports most of its food and fuel, and German U-boats in the Irish Sea threatened shipping lanes. This dependency on imports remains true today. The island produces very little of what it consumes, which is both a geographic reality and an economic calculation. In recent decades, the Isle of Man has diversified its economy beyond finance and gambling. There's been a push to develop the space industry, believe it or not. The island has become a hub for satellite companies and space-related businesses, taking advantage of its regulatory environment and geographic position. It's also invested in digital infrastructure with extensive fiber optic networks and data centers. The film and television industry has also discovered the island. Its landscapes double for other locations, and the tax incentives don't hurt. Several productions have filmed there, drawn by the combination of scenic locations, financial benefits, and proximity to the UK. Tourism remains a steady part of the economy, though it's not the dominant force it once was. Victorian-era tourists flocked to the island as a seaside resort destination, but cheap flights to Spain and Greece killed that industry. Today's tourists are more likely to be motorcycling enthusiasts coming for the TT, history buffs exploring the island's castles and Viking heritage, or walkers taking advantage of the coastal paths and rural trails. The island markets itself as a place where you can experience nature, history, and unique culture all in one small package. You can walk the entire coastal path in about a week. You can visit medieval castles, explore ancient burial sites, and see landscapes that haven't changed much in centuries. For people in the UK looking for a getaway that feels foreign but isn't too far from home, the Isle of Man fits the bill. Climate change poses some interesting challenges for the island. Rising sea levels threaten coastal areas, particularly in Douglas, where much of the economic activity is concentrated. More intense storms could damage infrastructure. But the island's government has been proactive about climate adaptation, investing in sea defenses and updating building codes. Being small and self-governing means the island can sometimes move faster on these issues than larger countries bogged down in political debates. The island's future is tied to its ability to maintain its unique status. As long as the arrangement with the UK holds, as long as the tax system remains competitive but respectable, and as long as the island can adapt to changing economic conditions, it should continue to thrive. The biggest threats would be a change in UK policy that forced the island to raise taxes, international pressure that closed down the financial services industry, or a major economic shock that dried up the revenue streams. But the Isle of Man has survived for over 1,000 years by being adaptable. It's gone from Viking kingdom to Scottish possession, to English dependency, to modern tax haven. Each time the world changed, the island found a new niche. There's no reason to think it won't continue to do so. So there you have it. The Isle of Man is a tiny island in the Irish Sea that's not part of the UK, not a country, and not quite like anywhere else on Earth. It's a self-governing Crown Dependency, with its own parliament, its own tax system, and its own unique culture. It's a tax haven that's also one of the safest places in Europe. It's home to the world's most dangerous race and a language back from the dead. It's a geographic anomaly that turned its position and political status into economic success. If you found this interesting, let me know what other unusual territories or geographic oddities you'd like to see covered. And if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content exploring the strange corners of our world. Thanks for watching.